I always believed that if anything important ever happened to our childhood home, I would hear about it first. Because that house wasn't just a piece of property. It was where our mother marked our heights on the kitchen wall, where our father fixed the same loose stair every winter, where my sister and I grew up fighting over small things and promising we'd never leave. So the day I found out it was gone still feels unreal because it didn't happen through a phone call or a message. It happened with a knock on the door, firm and confident, the kind that assumes ownership. And when I opened it, a man stood on the porch holding a clipboard and smiled politely before asking me when I planned to vacate the property, which made me laugh at first because I genuinely thought it was a mistake. But when I told him he had the wrong address, he looked down at his papers and calmly said the house had been sold the previous week. And when I asked who sold it, he hesitated just long enough before saying, "My sister's name." And I closed the door without another word, standing there in the quiet hallway as the old clock ticked like nothing had changed, even though everything had, my hands shaking as I checked my phone over and over, finding no missed calls, no warnings, no explanations, just silence. And when I finally managed to reach my sister hours later, her response was a single sentence telling me she thought I was done with the house, as if something like that could simply be assumed, as if memories and ownership disappear when you stop talking about them. And she spoke like she was being practical, like she had handled an inconvenience, explaining that the house was a burden and the sale was necessary, and that I had moved on. Even though I never signed anything, never agreed to sell, never gave permission. And yet she behaved as if the decision was already final, as if I had no right to question it. And what made it worse was learning that relatives knew before I did, that she had already told everyone I didn't care about the house, that I didn't want my share, that I wasn't involved anymore. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding or poor communication. It was a choice she had made deliberately, counting on the fact that I would stay quiet, that I wouldn't challenge it, that I wouldn't have the energy or the leverage to push back. Because she truly believed the sale was done and nothing could undo it. But what my sister didn't know, what she never thought to ask or verify, was that parts of that house were more complicated than she realized, and one overlooked detail was about to turn her finished deal into the beginning of a much bigger problem. After that message from my sister, I stopped trying to argue with her and started listening instead. Because every time I asked a question, she answered like someone who already believed she had won, casually explaining that the paperwork was handled, that the buyer was legitimate, that everything had been approved, and that I should be realistic, which was when I realized she wasn't just confident, she was relying on the idea that I didn't know what she had done. So instead of confronting her, I began quietly retracing the history of the house, remembering the years after our parents passed, when repairs were split unevenly, when certain renovations were paid for out of my own pocket, when decisions were made quickly because one of us had the time and the other didn't, and it slowly became clear that my sister had treated those moments like opportunities rather than responsibilities, assuming convenience would eventually turn into control. And as I dug through old emails, bank records, and faded paperwork stuffed into boxes I hadn't opened in years, I noticed how selective she had been with information, how often she summarized instead of sharing documents, how frequently she reassured me that things were temporary, and what unsettled me most wasn't the sale itself, but how certain she was that I couldn't undo it. Because certainty like that usually comes from believing there are no loose ends left. And yet, the more I reviewed, the more I remembered one particular decision she had never liked, one improvement to the house she openly complained about at the time, something she thought was unnecessary and expensive, something she had refused to help pay for, insisting it wasn't worth the trouble. And I remembered how firm I had been back then, how I handled it separately, how I made sure it was done properly because I didn't want any future confusion. And that memory sat in my mind like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the story she was telling now. So while she was busy celebrating her quick sale and planning what to do with the money, I scheduled a meeting I hadn't planned to have, bringing only a folder of old documents and a list of questions I hadn't asked before. And I didn't tell her about it because I wanted to understand exactly what she thought she had sold and what she might have overlooked in her rush to be done with the house. And as I sat there, going over timelines, signatures, and approvals, something became very clear to me for the first time since that knock on the door. My sister's confidence wasn't based on certainty, it was based on assumption, and assumptions are dangerous when paperwork exists to say otherwise. And in that moment, I realized the sale wasn't the end of the story at all. It was just the part where she stopped paying attention. By the time I heard about the sale, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My sister had finalized everything without so much as a hint, without asking me, without even telling me she was thinking about it. One moment, I was reminiscing about the home where we had grown up, where every corner held a memory, and the next, it was just gone. Gone. Sold to strangers, replaced with strangers' furniture, strangers' laughter echoing in rooms that had once been ours. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. It was emotional. It was a slap in the face of every memory I cherished. And worse, she had convinced our parents that it was the right move, twisting our family's narrative to make it seem like I had no right to even question it. I confronted her, voice trembling but sharp, trying to keep my composure. I needed answers, some sliver of logic to make sense of her actions. She smiled, that same self-satisfied smile she always wore when she thought she was cleverer than the rest of us. "It was business," she said casually, as if selling our childhood home was nothing more than a transaction. "You weren't living here, so why should it matter to you?" Her words hit me like cold steel. Every memory we shared, every secret tucked into those walls, every laugh, every fight, every late-night heart-to-heart. To her, it was just collateral damage. I knew I couldn't let this slide. I started digging, quietly at first. I called the real estate agent, I checked the paperwork, I pulled every document I could get my hands on. And that's when I saw it. A small detail buried deep in the legal papers, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A clause she had overlooked. A tiny but crucial loophole in the contract that could change everything. My pulse raced. This wasn't about revenge. It was about righting a wrong, about reclaiming something that had been ripped from me unfairly. I spent days studying the clause, researching, making calls to legal advisors, and mapping out every possible scenario. My sister thought she had won. She thought her clever little scheme was airtight, untouchable, irreversible. But she hadn't counted on me paying attention. She hadn't counted on me being meticulous, patient, and methodical. And as I pieced everything together, I realized the position I was in, the position she had unknowingly handed me, could not only reverse what she had done, but could also ensure she paid a price for her betrayal. That night, I sat in my old bedroom, staring at the empty walls, remembering all the moments that had made that house a home. I let myself feel the anger, the hurt, the sense of violation. But I also let myself feel something stronger. Determination. She had underestimated me, assumed I would accept the loss quietly, and she had made the biggest mistake of her life. Little did she know, every late-night memory, every whispered secret, every tear shed in that house had fueled me for this moment. The next steps would be quiet, calculated, and utterly devastating. The next morning, I moved carefully, like a chess player planning 5 moves ahead. I couldn't confront her yet, not openly. If I did, she would cover her tracks, erase any evidence, and my leverage would vanish. I needed patience, precision, and the kind of quiet strategy that would make her realize too late that she had underestimated me. I started by contacting the buyers, pretending to be interested in some minor detail about the house, casually asking questions that seemed innocent. Every word I spoke, every tone I used was calculated to gather information without revealing my intentions. As I dug deeper, I discovered something even more surprising. My sister hadn't followed the contract to the letter. There were clauses she had ignored, deadlines she had missed, and disclosures she had failed to make. The excitement and fear collided in me. Excitement at the possibilities, fear of making a misstep. But I reminded myself, this wasn't about revenge yet. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming what was mine, about making sure that she couldn't manipulate the situation in her favor. Every phone call I made, every email I sent, every document I reviewed brought me closer to the truth. Then came the breakthrough, a simple technicality buried in the legal fine print. If I acted correctly, the sale could be challenged, reversed, or at the very least, force my sister to compensate for what she had done. I could feel the tide turning. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not yet, but a quiet one, the kind that carries the weight of someone who has been wronged, but is finally poised to act. I also had to be careful with our family. My parents, though loving, were easily influenced by my sister's manipulations. I had to make sure they didn't interfere, didn't tip her off, didn't accidentally undo the work I had started. I framed my questions in casual conversations, carefully planting doubts and observations. Isn't it strange that this part of the sale was overlooked? I would ask, letting them think it was their own concern. Slowly, I started shifting the narrative, showing them the reality of what had been done without their full knowledge. Finally, the moment came when I confronted my sister, but on my terms. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I calmly laid out everything I had discovered. The overlooked clauses, the missing disclosures, the legal missteps. Her confidence faltered. She tried to laugh it off, tried to dismiss me, but I could see the panic in her eyes. The house, the memories, the trust she had destroyed, all of it was coming back to her in a wave she hadn't anticipated. She realized too late that every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to sideline me had only set the stage for her own downfall. By the end of that day, she knew she had lost control. The quiet power I had amassed, the evidence I had gathered, and the support I had subtly secured from the right people left her exposed. And in that silence, I understood something crucial. Revenge isn't about shouting. It isn't about dramatics. True revenge is quiet, calculated, and inescapable. And she was about to learn that lesson the hardest way possible. The day it all came together, I felt a mix of anticipation and calm satisfaction. I had played my cards carefully, and now the moment to reveal the truth had arrived. I requested a meeting with the buyers, the real estate agent, and, quietly, a legal advisor, all under the guise of clarifying some paperwork. My sister, oblivious to the storm brewing, thought she was still in control. She walked in with that smug, self-assured smile, expecting a routine conversation. Instead, she stepped straight into the trap she had unknowingly helped me set. I began by calmly presenting the overlooked clauses and the technical missteps in the sale, showing documented evidence of each mistake. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make threats, I simply laid out the facts. The buyers looked confused, the agent became visibly concerned, and my sister's smile started to fade. I could see the first flicker of panic in her eyes as the reality sank in. The sale was vulnerable. The documents she had dismissed as minor loopholes suddenly held immense power. Every word I spoke chipped away at the empire of control she had tried to build over something that belonged to both of us. Then I revealed the legal angle. Because of her oversights, the sale could be declared void unless she agreed to proper compensation, or worse, face potential penalties herself. The room went silent. She tried to interject, tried to argue, but it was clear she had no ground to stand on. The calm, quiet power I had cultivated over weeks had done its work. Her tactics of manipulation, her assumptions that I wouldn't notice, and her underestimation of me had all led to this moment of reckoning. My sister's face turned pale. She realized fully that she had not only betrayed me, but also jeopardized herself. The arrogance she had relied on for so long had evaporated in a matter of minutes. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate, I simply presented the resolution. She would either rectify the sale correctly, compensating for what had been done without my consent, or face the consequences outlined in the law. For the first time, she was powerless, and for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. As she scrambled to negotiate, I looked around the empty spaces of our childhood home, or rather the new owners who had temporarily occupied it. I allowed myself a quiet moment of reflection. This wasn't just about the house, it was about respect, fairness, and reclaiming my place in a family where loyalty had been tested and broken. I had taken the high road in methodical silence, and it had delivered the most satisfying outcome possible: justice without unnecessary drama. By the end of the day, my sister had no choice but to comply. The house would be handled correctly, and I had ensured she paid the price for trying to cut me out. She had underestimated me, she had betrayed me, and she had thought she could get away with it. But in the end, quiet determination, attention to detail, and patience had won. And as I left that house for the last time, I realized something important. Sometimes the most devastating victories are the ones that happen quietly, leaving the guilty to face the consequences of their own mistakes. And she had made one mistake she would never forget.